Now, Exodus chapter 21. And if you're looking for Exodus, you probably know it's the second book of the Bible. So if you're not in Genesis or Exodus, you've gone too far. Exodus 21. Now, the Lord is speaking with Moses, and he's giving the rules to the people. And he started with the famous 10 Commandments. And here God is speaking those words to Moses. He just got done talking about how, once again, the people are specifically not supposed to build anything or an image of anything in order to bow down and worship it as though that thing is their leader, is their God, is their deliverer. And the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you will say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I've talked with you from heaven. You will not make gods of silver to be with me, nor will you make for yourselves gods of gold."
Just forgot my Bible.
Okay. An altar of earth you will make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make for me an altar of stone, you will not build it. 21. You will not build it out of worked stones, right? So no shaping the rocks. If you're going to use a rock altar, use the rock that's there. And you will not go up by steps on it to show your nakedness, whatever that means. Now, these are the rules that you will set before them. Chapter 21. So Moses, here's the rules, God says. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he will serve for 6 years. So buying and selling people is a thing that was going on in the world then. Is it going on in the world now?
No.
Yes.
Oh.
It might not be happening to your neighbor, but it's happening to our neighbors in other countries and even in this country. People are bought and sold. Is it right to do so?
No.
Well, let's see what God's standard is, right? So this is how God wants it to work when someone is, hey, could you stop doing the thing with your feet? Because you're making noise. Thank you. This is the way God wants it to be when it comes to, let's say, buying a person on a contract. You guys have heard of a contract, right? Where you agree to one thing and the other person agrees to something else. Well, here's the deal. What do you do if you owe somebody more than you can pay them, right? You guys are all kids. You have a pretty good idea about how much money you have, right? You're thinking, well, what if you wreck somebody's car and you owe them $14,000?
Holy crap.
You think you could just reach in your pocket and fish out a few coins and count that up? Oh, good. I was hoping it was $14,005. Good.
I get $2.
Lucky me, right? No. But guess what? You still need to pay for the damage you did because you destroyed something. So what do? Well, in our culture, your parents pay for it, right? What if they couldn't pay? Well, here's the deal in the Hebrew culture during that day, and it's not a horrible system that the Lord sets up for these people. I think we could really learn a lot from it, and it goes like this. If you owe somebody more than you can pay, you work for that person and you can't say no, right? If they tell you a job to do, you go do that job. Now, I mean, obviously, if it's just morally wrong, it's just like they're your dad or your mom. You don't say no unless it's not wrong for you, or unless it's not right for you to say yes. You get what I'm saying? So you're a slave to that person. You don't decide to come to work. They're telling you to come to work. You get the idea? And, but God puts it this way. Now, these are the rules that you'll set before the people. When you buy a slave, a Hebrew slave, he will serve for 6 years. And in the 7th year, he will go out free for no charge, right? So no matter how much he owes, no matter how much he agreed to work for you, you get 6 years out of him, and you have to let him go in the 7th year. And You can't say, well, like, okay, I'm letting you go, but you still owe me. No, you let him go and he owes you nothing, right? If he comes in single, he'll go out single, right? So that's pretty simple. If he comes in married, then his wife will go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and he has sons or daughters, the wife and her children stay with the master, and he'll go out by himself. That's kind of rough, right? But we're talking about people who are slaves here. This is something that you and I don't deal with this in our day-to-day lives. But the way it works here, you hear that, how it says the master gave him a wife, right? He's got a girl slave and he's got a guy slave, and he's like, okay, you two make babies. And it's like, well, I guess that's your job or whatever. And they have kids, and then the kids and the wife stay with the guy who was the owner of the slave because he sets that slave free, but he can't take his family with him because he doesn't own his family. That is a situation we don't have to deal with today. That's a weird situation, isn't it? But that's the way it is, except there's a way to not have to leave if you're a slave. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I'm not going to go and be free, then his master will bring him to God, and he will bring him to the door or the doorpost. And his master will punch a hole in his ear with an awl, which is it's a leather working tool generally. It's a sharp tool for punching holes in leather. And you're like, wow, that seems brutal. No, it's not. He's getting his ear pierced, right? Girls go through this all the time, guys. You just gotta toughen up. Just pinch your ear. It doesn't hurt all that bad. And a sharp tool, punch through there, no problem. You'll just be like, and it's over, right? Because you're a big tough guy. You're so strong. Anyway, so he pierces his ear, but it's specifically here to the doorpost. Now, what have we already heard about doorposts in the Bible?
Covered with the blood.
Yeah! The doorpost that gets covered with the blood is the same doorpost that you pierce the guy's ear through with. Now he's linked to that doorpost, isn't he? And it's the doorpost of his master's house. I'm going to give you guys a takeaway right away. All this is stuff, you're not thinking, man, so if I become a slave, I got 6 years. If I get issued a wife and she's great, then I got to take off by myself when my 6 years is up. But I could stand in the doorway and say, hey, boss, nail me. And he nails your ear right there. No, you're not that's not something that you plan out. You're like, maybe I'll be a slave one day. Because in our world, that's not really something that's likely to happen to us. So why are we studying this? What's the good for us here? Obviously, you see some symbols, right? The doorpost, that same door where the blood is, and you're binding that person to it. By doing what? By literally driving a nail through their body. That doesn't happen anywhere else, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you get it? Do you see all of the images already tying together? And that guy who was a slave, but his price was paid completely, and then he's set free, he decides to stay with his master and serve that master because he likes it there. He loves his master, and he likes the family that he's found there. Do you get issued a family when you come into the church? Isn't that crazy? Right? You've got that whole church family. Every grandma in that room will come up and give you a big old hug and pinch your cheeks. And especially the little ones, you've seen what happens, right? You bring have you seen me do the circuit, right? I'll take Guppy around and I'll take her to every grandma and I'm like, look, child, and they're just like, oh, child, and I'm just like, okay, next, and I go around because they're all family, right? You see how this lines up perfectly as a teaching tool to teach you about how you're your own person, but you have a price you couldn't pay. The price is dealt with completely, even though you could never actually pay the full price. God's just like, I got you covered. It's going to cost me, but I got you covered. And then you're free, but then you decide, I want to stick with my master. I want to stay with him forever. I like the family I have here. I like him. That's the Lord. So, he will bore his ear through with an awl, right? He'll punch a hole in his ear, and he will be his slave forever. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not go out like the male slaves do. If she doesn't please her master, who has designated her for himself. Hold on a second. What are we talking about here? We're talking about a dude literally buying a wife. He's like, hey, you're very poor. You need some money. Let me buy your daughter. There we go. She's my wife now. Not part of our culture today, right?
No.
That would be, besides the fact that it seems really creepy that you've got like a 30, 40-year-old man going, you know what, I could use a wife. Let's go on the market. Hey, there's your teenage daughter. And here's some whatever, silver or whatever.
It's like going on eBay and buying a
She's
wife.
my wife now. Yeah, wouldn't recommend it,
Free
right?
shipping.
But you got to realize this is something that was happening in their world, and it still happens in the earth today, just not in our world, not in our local neighborhood. And the Lord says, if this happens, right? If some guy goes and he buys a wife, he's not supposed to just, have her work for him for 6 years as a wife and then go, well, contract's up, get out, right? You're free. No. This is a lesson to guys, right? If you're going to take a wife is for life. You take care of her forever. You don't send her on her way. She's not a hired worker. The guy who works to pay off his debt as a slave works for 6 years. And then you have to set him free and say, it's all forgiven. The woman who becomes your wife, that's a commitment for life. You don't treat her like she works for you. You're taking care of each other. It's a life commitment. So, if a guy buys a girl as a slave and turns her into his wife, he's not allowed to just fire her. You know what I mean? He's got to take care of her. He will have no right to sell her to someone else because he's broken faith with her. Right? He said he was going to be her husband, but he ended up not being her husband, not staying. And that's a huge problem in the world today, is guys that make promises to ladies and then they hook up and then the guy's like, you know what, I'm done with you. And then the girl is left on her own. And here the Bible says, guys, you got to take care of that girl. You have to, if you're not going to be her husband, you have to at least pay her way and make sure she doesn't have to support herself. Okay. If he designates her for his son, he'll deal with her like a daughter, right? So guy goes and he buys a slave girl and says, you're going to be the wife of my son. There you go, son. I got you a birthday present. It's like, thanks, Dad. I really didn't ask you for this. You shouldn't have. You really shouldn't have. I mean, honestly, this is a culture where the parents would go and find a bride or a husband for their kids. So this is a totally normal thing that somebody would do. The only exception here is that money is involved, right? Where you're actually like, hey, send your daughter to go marry my son. Here's some cash, and we'll be on our way. Basically what these rules say is you can't actually put a value upon a human life. You can't actually buy somebody in God's law. Have you noticed? If you buy somebody to work for you, they can only work for 6 years and then you have to let them go no matter how much you paid, right? If you buy someone to be a wife, you have to actually treat them like a human being. You have to treat them like a true wife with all of the rights of an actual wife, and it has nothing to do with the fact that you paid money for them. Really what God's saying here is the person that you buy with money has exactly the same rights as a person that you didn't buy with money. So in reality, there's no slavery in God's law, as far as we picture it, where you buy a person and then that person doesn't have the same rights as a regular person. What God says here is that a slave has the same rights as anybody else. The only thing the money gets you is it binds your agreement to say, look, you agreed to work for me, I've already paid you, you got to come and work. You're not allowed to say no. Other than that, they have the same rights. Now, if he takes another wife, he won't give any less food to his first wife, or clothing, or any of her other marital rights. So, again, this is a culture where people would take a wife, and then they would get tired of them, and they'd go, I'm getting a new one, right? And they get a new wife, and they're like, this one's way better than the old one. And your old wife is like, gee, thanks. And they would stop loving their old wife, and they would stop taking care of their first love. And God says, you're not allowed to do that. You've got to take care of her. You've got to make sure she's got her food. You've got to make sure she's got her clothing. And you've got to make sure that you give her all of her marital rights. Well, what are marital rights? One, you got to treat her like she's still your wife, because she's still your wife. And her kids are your kids. And all of the other stuff that you're expected to do to take care of your wife, you have to still do that. So that is ensuring the rights of a woman and not by any means diminishing them. And if he doesn't do these things for her, she's allowed to leave for nothing without any payment of money. Right? Even if you buy somebody, again, it's like you can't buy a person in God's law, because you can't. But if some guy pays money to have a woman become his wife, and then he doesn't take care of her, she's allowed to leave. And he's not allowed to stop her, or say that she has to pay something to get out of the marriage. Whoever hits a person so that he dies will be put to death. But if he didn't lay a trap for the guy, but God just happened to allow this situation to happen where the guy ended up dying, then I'll give a place where that guy can run away to. So if you basically what he's saying here, and he talks more in depth about it later on, he says, look, murderers get put to death. You murder somebody, you get killed. But let's say that you're in a scuffle. Right? You're in a fight, and the other person, you didn't mean to kill them or whatever, but they fall and hit their head or whatever. Something happens and they die, and you didn't mean to kill them. Well, then you've got a place to go to, and you need to stay there for your own safety. And he'll talk more about that later, so we'll move on. But if a man willfully attacks another man to kill him, even if he does so, with trickery, you will take him away from the altar so that you can go kill him. So whoever strikes his father or his mother will be put to death. You fight with dad or mom, you gotta die. Serious offense, right? Whoever steals a person and sells them, and anyone found in possession of him will be put to death. That's slavery. That's the way we picture slavery, right? Where you kidnap somebody and then you sell them to somebody else. And God says, anybody that does that does the taking of people and selling them as stock in trade, that person deserves to die. They need to be killed by the community for justice. And if you buy someone as a slave that was stolen, you need to be killed for justice. So, the way we picture slavery today, like black slavery was in America, where they would, these Muslim people in Africa would kidnap people that were not Muslims and sell them to Europeans who would sell them to American colonists, and that would be this trade in human lives. And God says, every person that buys those people and every person that sells those people and kidnaps them, those people deserve to die. It's absolutely wrong. It's just as bad as murdering someone. But God says that, if you owe somebody a bunch of money, you can become their slave to pay it off by your own decision. So you can't force someone to become a slave. But if somebody's got a debt they can't pay, then you work for a certain amount of time to pay that off. It's a different kind of slavery. But that's the way it is in the Bible. Let's move on. Whoever curses his father or his mother will be put to death. So not only are you not allowed to like physically fight with dad and mom, but if you talk trash about them, or if you wish that bad things would happen to them, or if you just generally disrespect them, worthy of death. Wow, that is a high standard. I know. Can you imagine? Are you glad for like the grace of God and the fact that we don't live in like a perfect society? But on the flip side, one day, all of these laws will actually be in effect, and we won't have to worry about it because we're not even going to want to break those laws. We're going to be naturally respectful to dad and mom. We're going to naturally put up with the things that are right and not even consider doing the things that are wrong. But until then, man, I'm really glad that God isn't enforcing these things right now. Now, where was I? They always have guys fighting. Have you noticed that? Like, he's already talked about, hey, if there's two dudes out in the, fighting and one of them accidentally kills the other one, there's a place for him to go. But if it was on purpose and he didn't kill him. And here he goes again. When men quarrel, right, when they're arguing and fighting with each other, and one hits the other one with a rock or with his fist, and the guy doesn't die, but he gets bedridden. He can't go to work. Right, because you crushed his head, or you broke his arm, or you snapped his leg. And then, if the guy can get up again and walk outdoors with his staff, the guy who hit him will be in the clear. But you have to pay for the loss of his time. If he wasn't able to work, you got to work and pay him off for his time. And you also have to pay to make sure he gets totally healed. When a man strikes his slave, male or female, what if the guy dies? Well, we've already talked about that. It's a law for the person who kills someone, either by accident or on purpose. There's a standard there. When a person strikes your slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave, what is a rod? It's a little stick. You guys ever hear the rule of thumb? The rule of thumb is talking about the standard for a rod. And the rule of thumb is the rod is not supposed to be any thicker than your thumb. So it's a stick that you use to swat somebody with, just like spanking, right? A switch. And the little ones hurt just fine, don't they? Right? You ever pick those little willow branches and Mom's like, come here and get yours. And whoosh, I got some good instruction that day, right? Can you imagine if she took like a big old tree trunk though and she's just like, do-ah! And whacks you over the head with it and you die? No, so rule of thumb, right? Rule of thumb. You don't hit somebody with a stick. You hit them with a little switch, right? So this is what we would call the switch. Literally, you're spanking somebody here. So this master, if he decides to spank one of his slaves, because, they were doing bad or whatever. And again, this is a culture where adults would get spanked, right? You do something wrong, you do something that shouldn't be done, guess what? Somebody who's in authority, they're going to spank you. And it's going to hurt just as bad as when you were a kid. So you know what? Don't do it. But if this master is spanking someone and they die, that's going a little bit overboard, isn't it? I think he wasn't following the rule of thumb.
Thumb.
If that happens, that person that died will be avenged. What does that mean? Well, it means the person that killed that person needs to die. And obviously, if you spank someone so hard that they die, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it really wrong, and that's murder. But get this: if the slave survives a day or two, it's not murder. Because the slave, was working for him. Wow, that's harsh. So if he beats you to death, he's a murderer. But if he beats you within an inch of your life, well, as long as you get better, that was part of your working for him. Wow. What's actually cool about that? if he beats you so you can't go out and work, you don't have to work and you're still getting paid. I'm just putting that out there. So that's another reason for the slave master to not beat somebody that's working for him so much that they can't work anymore, right? So this, on both ends of it, this works out actually in the favor of the slave. There, on the one end, he says, look, if you kill somebody, that's murder, even if they were working for you under that slave contract. And if they can't work, you know what? You messed up. That's what their job now is, just to get better. Now, get this one. This next one, Exodus chapter 21, verse 22, is how I get my stance on the abortion issue. So read this along with me, yeah?
Can I go get some water?
Go get some water. You're going to miss out on this one. The recording's going to go up on the channel. It's called Casey's Class on YouTube. Now, no, for real, I changed the name of the channel. Now, if dudes are fighting together, what's up with all these guys fighting each other? So if dudes are fighting together and they accidentally hit a pregnant woman and the baby comes out, but there's no harm to the baby, the one who hit her is definitely going to have to pay something. Whatever the woman's husband charges, right? You hit my baby while it was still inside the mom, you're going to pay the price. And he will pay whatever the judges say. But, alright, hold off on the giggling because we're going to talk about a baby dying in a second.
What?
But if there's harm to the baby, then you will pay life for life. So two guys are fighting, and this pregnant woman jumps in, and she's like, break it up. This one guy was just like, Falcon punch! And he couldn't cancel the Falcon punch, and he accidentally punches this woman right in the baby. Okay, but serious face real quick, and the baby dies.
Gun.
That man is a murderer. He'll pay blood for blood, it says. No accidental here. Notice how it doesn't say that he can go to the city of refuge for somebody that accidentally kills someone. Pregnant lady jumps in and you accidentally punch her and kill her baby. Or hit her and kill her baby. You die. Even if it was an accident. What happens if you intentionally go into a place where you pay someone to kill your baby? That person that killed your baby did it on purpose, didn't they? Is that worse than doing it by accident? Yeah. So what would this verse say about people who intentionally make it so that a baby is not born alive? It means that blood's on their hands. That's what it means. It means that they're a murderer. So this is the part of the Bible, and this is this is one of those issues. We talked about slavery, not a huge issue in our culture today. Maybe it was, 50 years ago. But we talk about killing babies. We're talking about doing something to a pregnant woman so that her baby is not born alive. That's a hot issue today. This part of the Bible tells you exactly, without a question, that that is murder. That there is blood on the hands of the people that do that. And again, we don't live in a world where these laws are enforced. We live in a world where God allows these things to happen. But He clearly tells us what's right and what's wrong. And this is His stance on abortion. This is what He thinks about a baby that's not born yet. He says, if something causes that baby to not be born healthy, that's just like you had attacked that baby after it was born. And there's no excuse. There's no accidents. Anyway. If there's harm, then you will pay life for life. That baby dies, the person who caused that baby to die is going to die. Can you tell that God really cares about protecting babies? He really does. Eye for eye. If that baby comes out with a damaged eye, you know what? We're taking your eye out. Tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, scratch for scratch. If a man hits his slave in the eye, male or female, and destroys their eye, he'll have to let that slave go because he destroyed their eye. If he knocks out their tooth, male or female, he has to let that slave go because of the tooth. You know what that says? A tooth of your slave is worth more than any amount of money they could possibly owe you.
It's like, what?
Do you see the value God puts on human life? Yeah. Okay. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, right? Ox, bam, hits somebody and kills them. The ox will be stoned. Everybody throw rocks at that ox till it dies. Throw rocks at that ox. There you go.
Or the ox.
Where was I?
charges
And
and
you will not eat his flesh. Interesting. You're not going to get mad cow disease then. But the owner of the ox will not be held responsible, right? So your ox just randomly kills somebody. It wasn't your fault, but that thing needs to die, and we're not going to use any part of that animal. But if the ox was accustomed to attacking people in the past, and its owner was already warned, but he didn't, pen the thing up, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox will be stoned, and its owner also will be put to death. Right? So if you've got an animal that's dangerous, and you don't deal with it yourself after you know that it's dangerous, it's your fault. And that's sort of the way it is today, where if you have a dog that bites people, that's okay, as long as you keep that dog away from people, or you put up a sign, beware of dog, do not jump over my fence, and you keep the dog fenced in. If somebody jumps over your fence and they get bit real hard, it's their own fault.
Yeah.
But if that dog jumps over the fence, you built the fence wrong, right? Or if you leave the gate open and that dog runs out and bites some little girl in the face, that's your fault. That's your fault. I don't know why it's so funny to you.
Why'd you have to do girl?
If a ransom is imposed on him, then he will give for the redemption of his life whatever is imposed on him. If it gores a man's son or daughter, he will be dealt with according to the same rule. If the ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner will give to their master 30 pieces of silver, and the ox will be killed. What's 30 pieces of silver? It's the price for an injured slave. There you go. There's no other place that 30 pieces of silver shows up in the Bible. Absolutely not. When a man opens a pit,
Oh.
you get it? When a man opens a pit, or when a man digs a pit and doesn't cover it. So why would you dig a pit in the ground? Number one, kids, it's really fun to dig a hole. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. But have you ever started digging a hole and you're like, you know what? I'll bet I could just never stop. What would happen if I dig this hole all evening? And you're like, digging. And then your dad's like, fill that in. Like, aww. And the reason is, if you dig a hole and then somebody gets hurt because of that, it's your fault.
What if you
So,
got the hole and you got
there's other reasons for digging a pit, right? You can dig a pit to trap an animal. You can dig a pit to work on things that are underground, like underground electronics and pipelines and sewer stuff, right? So you're digging a pit, and you know what they do when they dig that hole? They cover it up with plywood or with something so people don't fall into it. But what if you don't cover it? So if you open a pit and you don't cover it, and an ox or a donkey, listen up guys, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, today it would be like a car driving into it, right? That's your ox, that's your donkey, it's your family car. Boom! What happened? We drove into a pit. The owner of the pit will pay for the damages. He'll give money to the owner, and the dead animal will belong to him, right? So donkey falls in, crack, he's dead. Donkeys are super adorable. I hate the idea of a donkey falling into a hole and dying. I guess it happens. When one man's ox butts another one's so that it dies, that's one heck of a butting. Then they'll sell the live ox and share its price, and the dead animal also they will share. So 2 animals fight, one of them dies. My ox probably won. You should see the other ox. But if 2 animals fight and one of them dies, the owners both sell the dead one and the live one, and they share the cost between them. So they're both out something. And honestly, they're both responsible, because why was your ox in the field of my ox? Why were they together so that they fought? Somebody was not doing the job yet. Or, if in the past its owner had not kept it in, he will pay for the ox, and the dead animal belongs to him, right? So if you're like, if your cow is breaking out all the time and going and picking fights with somebody else's cow, you got to pay for any damages that it does. But if these two cows happen to meet each other and they're like, you know what, it's murder time, and they start smashing heads until one of them dies, this is what guys do, right? They just start smashing heads until somebody dies. It's all fun and games until somebody's brain smushes. And these two animals, if they just happen to meet each other and go, you know what, it's murder time, and they fight each other until one of them dies, then the two owners just sell what they can and split the cost between the two of them. Okay. That's it. So there's more rules for oxen and sheep and slaves and wives coming up in the future.
Cut.